Welcome to another video on stories of our history. Today, we are embarking on a journey through one of the most remarkable cultural transformations in the history of the medieval world, a transformation that began not with the clash of swords on a battlefield but with the quiet scratching of pens on parchment, not with the fall of a city but with the slow, inexorable rise of a bureaucratic class that would reshape an empire from within. The story of the Abbasid Caliphate and its Persian courtiers is a story of conquest in reverse, a tale in which the vanquished people of the ancient Sasanian Empire, having lost their political independence in the 7th century, gradually reconquered the very structures of power that had enslaved them, not by taking up arms against their Arab overlords but by mastering the arts of administration, diplomacy, and courtly intrigue that were essential to governing a vast and complex state. When the armies of Islam burst forth from the Arabian Peninsula in the middle of the 7th century, they swept across the Middle East with astonishing speed, toppling the great powers of the age, including the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Sasanian Empire in the east, and by the year 651 CE, the last Sasanian ruler, Yazdijerd III, had been hunted down and killed, bringing an end to a dynasty that had ruled Persia for over 400 years. The Arab conquest was a military triumph of extraordinary proportions, but it was not a cultural annihilation, for the conquerors, who were largely pastoral nomads with little experience in governing settled agricultural societies, found themselves in possession of territories that required sophisticated systems of taxation, irrigation, and administration. Systems that had been developed and refined by the Persians over centuries of imperial rule. The Umayyad Caliphate, which ruled the Islamic world from Damascus beginning in 661 CE, initially sought to maintain a strict separation between the Arab conquerors and the non-Arab subjects, and the Mawali, the non-Arab converts to Islam, were often treated as inferior to the Arab Muslims, regardless of their piety or their contributions to the faith. A policy that created deep resentments in the eastern provinces, particularly in the region of Khorasan, where the Iranian population had a long and proud history of imperial greatness. It was in this crucible of resentment and hope that the Abbasid movement was born, a political and religious movement that promised to restore justice, to end the discrimination against non-Arabs, and to return the Caliphate to the family of the Prophet Muhammad, from whom the Abbasids claimed descent through their ancestor al-Abbas, an uncle of the Prophet. The Abbasid propaganda, spread by a network of secret agents and traveling merchants across the vast expanses of Khorasan and Central Asia, found fertile ground among the Iranian converts who saw in this movement an opportunity to reclaim their dignity and to participate fully in the life of the Islamic community. And when the black banners of the Abbasid Revolution were unfurled in the city of Merv in the year 747 CE, thousands of Iranians flocked to the cause, eager to overthrow the Umayyads and to build a new order in which they would be recognized as equals. The revolution, led by the mysterious figure Abu Muslim al-Khorasani, a man of shadowy origins but immense organizational talent, swept across the eastern provinces with a fury that the Umayyads could not withstand, and in 750 CE, the last Umayyad Caliph, Marwan II, was defeated at the Battle of the Zab in northern Iraq, and the Abbasid Caliphate was proclaimed, ushering in a new era in Islamic history. But the revolution did not end with the victory on the battlefield, for the new Abbasid rulers soon discovered that the art of governing an empire was far more difficult than the art of conquering one, and they turned to the very people who had helped them to power, the Iranian administrators and secretaries who possessed the knowledge and the skills necessary to manage the complex machinery of a centralized state. This is where our story truly begins, in the transition from revolution to governance, a transition that would see the Persian tradition of imperial administration rise from the ashes of the Sasanian Empire and take its place at the very heart of the Abbasid court, transforming the Caliphate into a truly cosmopolitan empire that would become the envy of the world. The old saying that the Persians conquered the conquerors is not a boast of military victory but a recognition of a deeper truth, that the power of ideas and institutions can outlast the power of armies, and that the civilization of the defeated can, in time, reshape the civilization of the victors, creating something new and enduring that belongs to both. As we explore the chambers of the Abbasid palace, the offices of the Diwan, and the libraries where the wisdom of the ancients was translated into the language of the Quran, we will witness the birth of a hybrid civilization, one that was neither purely Arab nor purely Persian but a magnificent fusion of both. A civilization that would carry the torch of learning and culture through the dark centuries of the European Middle Ages and would pass it on to future generations, including our own. The relationship between the Arab conquerors and the Persian subjects in the early Islamic period was complex and fraught with tension, for the Arabs brought with them a new religion and a new language, but they also brought a social order that was fundamentally different from the hierarchical and bureaucratic traditions of the Sasanian Empire. And the encounter between these two worlds would shape the political and cultural landscape of the Middle East for centuries to come. The Sasanian Empire, which had ruled Persia from 224 CE until its fall in 651 CE, was one of the most sophisticated states in the ancient world, with a centralized administration, a complex system of taxation, a professional army, and a court culture that emphasized the divine right of the king and the importance of hierarchy and order in all aspects of life. The Sasanian kings, who traced their lineage to the legendary rulers of the Avestan tradition, governed through a network of provinces, each supervised by a governor or marzban, and they relied on a class of highly trained bureaucrats, known as dabiran, to manage the affairs of state, including the collection of taxes, the distribution of land grants, and the maintenance of the royal archives. This bureaucratic tradition did not disappear with the Arab conquest, for the new rulers, who were more skilled in the arts of war than in the intricacies of fiscal administration, found it necessary to employ many of the same Persian officials who had served the Sasanian kings, and these officials, in turn, passed their knowledge and their methods down to their sons and grandsons, creating a hereditary class of administrators who would continue to wield influence long after the Arab conquest. The Umayyad caliphs in Damascus were aware of the value of these Persian bureaucrats, but they were also wary of their loyalty, for the Persians, who had lost their empire to the Arabs, might be tempted to collaborate with enemies of the Caliphate or to plot the restoration of their own dynasty, and this suspicion led the Umayyads to adopt a policy of Arab supremacy, in which the highest offices of state were reserved for Arabs, while the Persians and other non-Arabs were relegated to subordinate positions. This policy, however, was deeply resented by the Iranian converts to Islam, who saw themselves as equal members of the Muslim community and who believed that the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad rejected distinctions based on race or ethnicity, and their resentment was exploited by the Abbasid propagandists, who promised to restore the true spirit of Islam by ending the discrimination against non-Arabs and by creating a more just and inclusive society. The Abbasid Revolution, therefore, was not merely a political struggle between two rival dynasties but a social revolution, a revolt of the disenfranchised against the entrenched privileges of the Arab aristocracy, and the Iranians who joined the movement did so with the hope of achieving not only political power but also cultural recognition and social equality. When the Abbasids finally triumphed, they did not forget the contributions of their Iranian supporters, and the early Abbasid caliphs, particularly al-Mansur, who reigned from 754 to 775 CE, actively recruited Persian administrators and advisors into their government, recognizing that the future of the Caliphate depended on the ability to govern effectively, not just on the ability to conquer. This policy of inclusion was not without its critics, for some Arabs complained that the caliph was surrounding himself with foreigners. But the pragmatic caliphs understood that the Persian bureaucrats possessed skills that were essential for the survival of the empire, and they were willing to risk the displeasure of the Arab aristocracy in order to secure the services of these talented men. The result was a gradual transformation of the Abbasid state, a transformation that saw the emergence of a new class of administrators, drawn from the ranks of the Iranian converts, who would come to dominate the offices of the Caliphate and to shape its policies in ways that reflected their own cultural heritage, and this transformation is the subject of our story today. The story of how the conquered Persians conquered their conquerors not through force of arms, but through the power of knowledge and organization. The city of Baghdad, founded by al-Mansur in 762 CE, would become the stage for this transformation, a city that was built on the banks of the Tigris River, near the site of the ancient Sasanian capital of Ctesiphon, and it was in this new capital that the fusion of Arab and Persian cultures would reach its fullest expression, creating a civilization that was both Islamic in its faith and cosmopolitan in its outlook. The revolution of Khorasan, which toppled the Umayyad dynasty and brought the Abbasids to power, was a remarkable moment in the history of the Islamic world, for it demonstrated that the political center of gravity had shifted away from the Arab heartland of Syria and toward the eastern provinces, where the majority of the population was of Iranian descent, and where the memory of the Sasanian Empire was still very much alive. Khorasan, a vast region that encompassed much of present-day northeastern Iran, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, was the eastern frontier of the Islamic Empire, a land of rugged mountains, fertile valleys, and ancient cities, and it was here that the Arab conquerors had encountered a civilization that was both sophisticated and proud, a civilization that had produced great poets, philosophers, and administrators, and that had ruled over a vast empire for centuries. The Arab governors of Khorasan, appointed by the Umayyad caliphs in Damascus, had ruled this region with a heavy hand, imposing taxes that fell most heavily on the non-Arab population, and denying the local Iranian converts to Islam the social and political equality that they believed was their right as Muslims. And this policy of discrimination had created a deep well of resentment that the Abbasid propagandists were able to tap into with remarkable success. The Abbasid movement, which had been building in secret for decades, found its most fertile recruiting ground among the Iranian Wali of Khorasan, who saw in the Abbasid promise of justice and equality a chance to throw off the yoke of Umayyad oppression and to assert their own dignity and worth in the new Islamic order, and they flocked to the black banners of the revolution in numbers that astonished even the movement's own leaders. The man who would lead this revolution, Abu Muslim al-Khorasani, was a figure of mystery and charisma, a man whose origins are shrouded in legend, with some sources claiming that he was of Persian descent, perhaps from a family of Isfahan or from the vicinity of Balkh, while others suggest that he was of Arab or mixed ancestry. But whatever his origins, he proved to be a brilliant military commander and a shrewd political organizer, capable of uniting the diverse and often fractious elements of the Khorasani population into a disciplined and effective fighting force. Abu Muslim's army, which marched under the black banners of the Abbasid cause, was a coalition of Iranians, Arabs, and other groups who shared a common hatred of the Umayyad regime and a common hope for a better future, and this coalition, bound together by a shared vision of justice and equality, swept across the eastern provinces with a speed and ferocity that the Umayyad governors could not withstand, capturing city after city, including the great urban centers of Merv, Nishapur, and Ray, before turning westward to confront the main Umayyad forces. The climactic battle of the revolution took place in January of 750 CE on the banks of the Great Zab River, a tributary of the Tigris in what is today northern Iraq, and there the Abbasid army, commanded by Abu Muslim's generals and by the Abbasid family's own military leader, Abdullah ibn Ali, inflicted a crushing defeat on the Umayyad Caliph Marwan II, who fled the battlefield and was eventually hunted down and killed in Egypt, bringing an end to the Umayyad dynasty and ushering in a new era of Abbasid rule. The revolution had triumphed, but the question that now faced the new Abbasid caliphs was how to govern the vast and diverse empire that they had inherited, and the answer to that question would be found not in the Arab tribal traditions of the past but in the administrative and bureaucratic traditions of the Persians, who had been the very people that the revolution had promised to elevate. The first Abbasid caliph, Abu al-Abbas al-Safa, who reigned from 750 to 754 CE, recognized the debt that his dynasty owed to the people of Khorasan, and he moved the capital of the Caliphate from Syria to Kufa in Iraq, a city that was closer to the centers of Iranian population and that would serve as a bridge between the Arab and Persian worlds. And this move was a clear signal that the new regime intended to break with the Umayyad past and to create a new order in which the contributions of the Iranians would be recognized and rewarded. The Iranian supporters of the revolution expected to be given positions of power and influence in the new administration, and they were not disappointed, for the early Abbasid caliphs, particularly al-Mansur, who succeeded his brother al-Safa in 754 CE, actively recruited Persian administrators, secretaries, and advisors into the highest offices of the state, recognizing that these men possessed the skills and the knowledge that were essential for the task of building a new empire. The revolution of Khorasan was thus not an end in itself but a beginning, A moment of rupture that opened the door to a profound transformation of Islamic society, a transformation that would see the rise of a Persianized administrative class that would shape the destiny of the Caliphate for generations to come, and it is to this transformation that we now turn our attention. For it is in the story of these Persian administrators and their role in the Abbasid court that we will find the true meaning of the phrase, "The Persians conquer the conquerors." The role of the Iranian converts to Islam in the Abbasid Revolution was not simply that of soldiers and fighters, for the revolution also drew on the support of a network of propagandists, secretaries, and local leaders who used their skills of communication and organization to spread the Abbasid message and to mobilize the population against the Umayyads. And these men, many of whom were of Persian descent, would go on to play a crucial role in the administration of the new caliphate. The propaganda of the Abbasid movement was a sophisticated and carefully crafted message that appealed to the hopes and grievances of the Iranian population, promising an end to the discrimination against non-Arabs, a restoration of the rights of the family of the Prophet, and a return to the true principles of Islam, which emphasized the equality of all believers regardless of their ethnic or tribal origins. And this message was spread by a network of agents known as du'at, or missionaries, who traveled throughout the eastern provinces, from the great cities of Merv and Nishaper to the remote villages of the countryside, carrying the news of the coming revolution and recruiting supporters for the cause. The du'at were often men of learning and eloquence, skilled in the arts of rhetoric and persuasion, and they were drawn from a variety of backgrounds, including merchants, scholars, and minor officials, but many of them were of Iranian descent, and they were able to communicate with the local population in their own language and to appeal to their sense of pride in their Persian heritage, which they saw as being under threat from the Arab-dominated Umayyad regime. The success of this propaganda campaign was remarkable, for the Abbasid movement was able to build a broad coalition of support that cut across ethnic and social lines, uniting Iranians and Arabs, urban dwellers and rural peasants, soldiers and civilians, in a common struggle against the Umayyads. And this coalition was held together not only by a shared hatred of the old regime but also by a shared hope for a better future, a future in which the promise of Islam would be fulfilled and all believers would be treated with justice and dignity. The revolution that finally erupted in 747 CE was thus the culmination of decades of patient organizing and propaganda, and it was a testament to the power of ideas to shape the course of history. For the Abbasid movement had succeeded in creating a political alternative to the Umayyad regime that was based not on the old tribal loyalties of the Arab past, but on a new vision of Islamic unity and justice. And this vision had a powerful appeal to the Iranian converts who had long felt marginalized and excluded by the Umayyad system. When the revolution triumphed, the new Abbasid rulers faced the challenge of translating this vision into reality, and they turned to the men who had helped them to power, the Iranian administrators and propagandists who had proven their loyalty and their competence during the long years of struggle, and these men were rewarded with positions of power and influence in the new administration, where they set about the task of building a state that would reflect the ideals of the revolution and that would govern the vast territories of the Caliphate with efficiency and justice. The Iranian presence in the Abbasid administration was therefore not a foreign invasion but a natural outgrowth of the revolution itself, for the revolution had been a coalition of Arabs and Iranians working together to overthrow a common enemy, and the new order that emerged from the revolution was a coalition government in which the Iranians played a full and equal role. And this coalition government would prove to be remarkably durable, lasting for centuries and producing a civilization that was one of the glories of the medieval world. The story of the Iranian conquest of the Abbasid court is thus not a story of conflict or conquest but a story of cooperation and integration, a story of how two great cultures, the Arab and the Persian, came together to create something new and magnificent, a civilization that was greater than the sum of its parts. And this story is a reminder of the power of diversity and inclusion to produce extraordinary results, a lesson that is as relevant today as it was in the 8th century. The foundation of Baghdad in 762 CE by the second Abbasid Caliph, Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, was one of the most consequential decisions in the history of the Islamic world, for it marked a decisive shift in the center of gravity of the Caliphate away from the Arab heartland of Syria and toward the rich agricultural lands of Iraq, where the ancient traditions of Mesopotamian and Persian civilization were still deeply rooted in the soil and in the memory of the people. Al-Mansur, who was a shrewd and pragmatic ruler, understood that the survival of the Abbasid dynasty depended on its ability to govern a vast and diverse empire, and he recognized that the old Umayyad capital of Damascus, located on the western edge of the empire, was too far from the centers of population and power in the east, where the majority of the empire's subjects lived and where the most productive agricultural lands were located. The choice of the site for the new capital was made with great care, for al-Mansur was known for his attention to detail and his interest in geography and administration, and he reportedly consulted with his advisors, many of whom were Persian, about the best location for a city that would serve as the political, economic, and cultural center of the Caliphate. The site that was eventually chosen was on the west bank of the Tigris River, near the ancient city of Ctesiphon, which had been the winter capital of the Sasanian Empire, and which had been one of the greatest cities in the world before its fall to the Arab armies in 637 CE, and the proximity of the new capital to the old Sasanian capital was no accident, for it symbolized the continuity between the ancient Persian imperial tradition and the new Islamic order that the Abbasids were building. The construction of Baghdad was a massive undertaking, involving tens of thousands of workers, architects, and artisans drawn from all corners of the empire, and the city was designed as a perfect circle, a geometric form that reflected the cosmological ideas of the time, in which the ruler was seen as the center of the universe, surrounded by the concentric circles of his court, his administration, and his subjects, and this design was itself a reflection of the Persian conception of the king as the axis of the world, a conception that the Abbasids adopted and adapted to their own Islamic framework. The round city of Baghdad, with its imposing walls, its 4 great gates, and its central palace and mosque, was unlike anything that had been seen in the Islamic world before, and it was a clear statement of the new dynasty's ambition and power, a power that was not based on the tribal loyalties of the Arab past but on the centralized authority of an imperial state, supported by a professional bureaucracy and a standing army, and this model of government was directly inspired by the administrative traditions of the Sasanian Empire, which had governed a vast and diverse territory for centuries using just such a system. The location of Baghdad was not only strategically important, but also economically advantageous, for the city was situated on the banks of the Tigris, which provided a vital artery for trade and communication, connecting the capital to the Persian Gulf in the south and to the rich agricultural regions of Mesopotamia in the north, and the surrounding countryside was among the most productive in the world, capable of supporting a large urban population and of generating the tax revenues that were essential for the maintenance of the empire. The foundation of Baghdad also had profound cultural implications, for the new capital quickly became a magnet for scholars, merchants, artists, and intellectuals from all over the world, and it was in this cosmopolitan environment that the fusion of Arab and Persian cultures reached its fullest expression, as the Arabic language of the Quran and the Persian language of the ancient court came together to create a new, hybrid civilization that was neither purely one nor the other but a magnificent synthesis of both, and this synthesis would produce some of the greatest achievements in the history of human civilization, from the poetry of the classical period to the scientific and philosophical works that would later be translated into Latin and would help to spark the European Renaissance. The city of Baghdad, therefore, was not just the capital but a symbol of the new order that the Abbasids were building, an order that was Islamic in its faith but cosmopolitan in its outlook, and that drew on the best of the Arab and Persian traditions to create a civilization that would endure for centuries and that would leave an indelible mark on the history of the world. And it is this civilization, with its magnificent blend of cultures and its remarkable achievements, that we are exploring in this series of videos. The political and cultural geography of Iraq, where the Abbasids chose to establish their capital, was a palimpsest of ancient civilizations, a land that had been home to the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Persians, and each of these civilizations had left its mark on the landscape, on the institutions, and on the memory of the people. And it was this rich and layered heritage that the Abbasids inherited when they founded Baghdad on the banks of the Tigris. The ancient city of Ctesiphon, which lay just across the river from the site of the new capital, had been one of the largest and most magnificent cities in the world, the winter residence of the Sasanian kings, and its great palace, the Tak Kasra, with its enormous vaulted hall, was a marvel of engineering and a symbol of the power and wealth of the Persian Empire, and even in its ruined state, it continued to inspire awe and admiration among the Arabs, who saw in it a reminder of the greatness of the civilization that they had conquered. The Persian influence on the region was not limited to the great monuments of the capital, for the entire agricultural system of Mesopotamia, with its intricate network of canals, dams, and irrigation channels, was a product of centuries of Persian and Mesopotamian engineering, and the tax system that supported the state was based on the careful measurement and classification of land. A method that had been developed and refined by the Sasanian administration and that the Arabs adopted and continued to use, often with the help of the very same Persian officials who had served the old regime. The choice of Baghdad as the capital was thus a deliberate act of cultural appropriation, a recognition by the Abbasids that the future of their empire lay not in the desert traditions of the Arab past but in the rich and sophisticated civilization of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, where the arts of government, agriculture, and commerce had been practiced for millennia, and where the legacy of the Persian Empire was still very much alive in the daily lives of the people. The new city was built not far from the ancient Sasanian capital, and the Abbasids deliberately incorporated elements of Persian architectural and administrative style into their new capital, from the design of the palace and the court to the organization of the bureaucracy and the system of taxation. And this conscious borrowing from the Persian tradition was a clear signal that the new dynasty intended to rule in the manner of the old Persian kings, albeit within an Islamic framework, and it was a policy that would have profound consequences for the future of the Caliphate, as the Persian model of imperial government gradually came to dominate the political culture of the Abbasid state. The foundation of Baghdad was thus a turning point in the history of the Islamic world, a moment when the center of political power shifted from the Arab West to the Persian-influenced East, and when the Islamic Caliphate began to transform itself from a tribal confederation into a true empire, with all the bureaucratic machinery and imperial ideology that such a transformation required. And this transformation was made possible by the contributions of the Persian administrators and scholars, who flocked to the new capital, bringing with them the accumulated wisdom of their ancient civilization and applying it to the task of building a new Islamic state. The office of the vizier, which would become one of the most important institutions in the Abbasid government, was a direct borrowing from the administrative traditions of the Sasanian Empire, where the high official known as the Wuzurg Framidar, or the Grand Administrator, had served as the chief minister of the king, responsible for overseeing the entire machinery of the state and for representing the royal will to the far-flung provinces of the empire, and this office was adapted by the Abbasids to their own Islamic context, becoming the chief executive officer of the Caliphate, second only to the Caliph himself in authority and influence. The first Abbasid caliphs did not immediately create the office of the vizier, for the early years of the dynasty were marked by a certain fluidity in the organization of the government, with the caliph personally supervising many aspects of administration. But as the empire grew and the demands of government became more complex, the need for a chief minister became increasingly apparent. And it was during the reign of al-Mansur, the builder of Baghdad, that the office began to take shape, with the appointment of trusted advisors who were given broad authority over the day-to-day operations of the state. The term vizier itself is derived from the Arabic word wazir, which means helper or burden bearer, and it appears in the Quran in reference to the prophet Aaron, who was described as a vizier to his brother Moses. But the institution of the vizier as a chief minister with specific administrative responsibilities was not derived from the Quran or from the early Islamic tradition but was borrowed from the Persian model, where the Wuzurg Framidar had been a central figure in the Sasanian court for centuries, and the Abbasids, who were eager to adopt the administrative techniques of the Persians, saw the value of this institution and incorporated it into their own government. The powers of the Abbasid vizier were extensive, for he was responsible for coordinating the activities of the various government departments, known as diwans, which handled everything from tax collection and military pay to official correspondence and the maintenance of the postal system, and he was also the chief advisor to the caliph. The man who could speak truth to power and who could influence the decisions of the sovereign through his wisdom and his experience, and this combination of executive and advisory functions made the vizier the most powerful official in the caliphate after the caliph himself, and in some cases, the vizier's power rivaled that of the sovereign, particularly when the caliph was weak or distracted by the pleasures of the court. The first great vizier of the Abbasid Caliphate was Abu Salama al-Kalal, who served under the first caliph, al-Safa, and who was known as the vizier of the family of Muhammad. But he was soon followed by more famous and influential figures, including the Barmakid family, who would dominate the administration for decades and whose name would become synonymous with the power and the splendor of the Abbasid court, and these early viziers, many of whom were of Persian descent, used their positions to build a professional bureaucracy that was capable of governing the vast territories of the empire with efficiency and dispatch, and in doing so, they laid the foundations for the golden age of the Abbasid Caliphate, a period of unprecedented prosperity and cultural achievement that would last for over a century. The vizier was not simply a bureaucratic functionary but a political figure of immense importance, for he was the bridge between the caliph and the rest of the government, and his ability to command the loyalty of the bureaucracy and to manage the affairs of state was essential to the stability of the regime. And when the vizier was strong and capable, the caliphate flourished. But when the vizier was weak or corrupt, the state suffered, and this dependence on the quality of the chief minister was a feature that the Abbasids shared with the Sasanian Empire, where the effectiveness of the Wazir Fremdar was often the key to the success or failure of the reign. The rise of the vizierate was thus a crucial step in the Persianization of the Abbasid state, for it introduced into the heart of the Islamic government an institution that was directly modeled on the administrative practices of the ancient Persian Empire, and it created a channel through which the influence of Persian culture and Persian methods of governance could flow into every aspect of the caliphate's operations. And this influence would prove to be enduring, for the office of the vizier would continue to exist in various forms throughout the Islamic world for centuries, a living legacy of the Persian contribution to the art of government, and a testament to the power of the conquered to reshape the institutions of their conquerors. The creation of a professional bureaucracy was one of the most significant achievements of the early Abbasid period, and it was made possible by the existence of a class of trained administrators, the Kutab, or secretaries, who were the backbone of the imperial government, and many of these secretaries came from families that had been involved in administration since the days of the Sasanian Empire, carrying with them a tradition of bureaucratic expertise that was passed down from father to son, and this hereditary knowledge was essential to the smooth functioning of the state. The Kutab were responsible for the day-to-day operations of the government, including the drafting of official correspondence, the maintenance of tax records, the administration of the postal system, and the supervision of the various government departments, and their work required a high level of education and skill, for they had to be literate in Arabic, which was the language of administration, and they had to be familiar with the intricacies of accounting, geography, and law, and many of them were also accomplished poets, historians, and scholars, who used their positions to contribute to the intellectual life of the court. The training of a secretary was a long and rigorous process, for the young man who aspired to a career in the bureaucracy had to master not only the technical skills of writing and accounting but also the cultural knowledge that was expected of a member of the administrative elite, including a familiarity with the Arabic language and literature, a knowledge of the principles of Islamic law, and an understanding of the traditions of Persian statecraft, which were considered essential for anyone who wished to advise the caliph on matters of government, and this combination of technical and cultural education produced a class of officials who were both competent and cultivated, men who could manage the finances of a province as easily as they could compose a poem or engage in a philosophical debate. The influence of the Persian tradition on the training and the ethos of the Kutab was profound, for the Persian bureaucratic tradition, which had been developed over centuries of imperial rule, emphasized the importance of precision, order, and attention to detail, and it also stressed the ethical responsibilities of the administrator, who was expected to serve the state with honesty and integrity, to protect the interests of the taxpayers, and to provide the ruler with sound advice, even when that advice was unwelcome, and these values were absorbed by the Abbasid Kutab, who saw themselves not as mere servants of the Caliph but as guardians of the public interest, responsible for ensuring that the machinery of government operated fairly and efficiently. The Persian influence on the bureaucracy was also evident in the organization of the government departments, for the Abbasid Diwans, which were the functional units of the administration, were modeled on the Sasanian system, with separate departments for the army, the treasury, the postal service, and the chancery, and the methods used to collect taxes, to distribute salaries, and to maintain records were all derived from Persian practices, adapted to the requirements of the new Islamic state. And this borrowing from the Persian tradition was a deliberate policy of the early Abbasid caliphs, who recognized the superiority of Persian administrative methods and who were eager to learn from the civilization that they had conquered. The Persian secretaries and administrators who served in the Abbasid court were thus the heirs of a long and distinguished tradition, a tradition that went back to the days of the Achaemenid Empire, when the Persians had built the first truly global empire in history, and this tradition, with its emphasis on the importance of written records, the rule of law, and the efficient management of resources, was a crucial contribution to the success of the Abbasid Caliphate, a contribution that is often overlooked in the popular accounts of Islamic history, which tend to focus on the exploits of soldiers and conquerors rather than on the quiet work of the bureaucrats who made the empire possible. But without these men, the Caliphate could not have survived, and it is to them that we owe much of the splendor and the achievement of the Abbasid Golden Age. The family of the Barmakids, whose name has become synonymous with the power and the splendor of the Abbasid court, is the most famous example of the influence of Persian culture and Persian administrative talent on the Caliphate, and the story of their rise and fall is one of the most dramatic episodes in the history of the Islamic world, a story of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal that reads like a novel and that illuminates the complex relationship between the Arab rulers and their Persian subjects. The Barmakids trace their origins to the city of Balkh, in the region of Bactria, in what is today northern Afghanistan, and they were descended from a family of high priests who had served the Buddhist temple of Nawbahar, a great religious center that was famous throughout the Eastern world, and after the Arab conquest, the family converted to Islam and entered the service of the new rulers, bringing with them the administrative skills and the cultural sophistication that had been cultivated over generations of religious and political leadership. The first member of the family to achieve prominence in the Abbasid administration was Khalid al-Barmaki, who served under the first Abbasid Caliph, al-Safa, and who continued to hold important offices under al-Mansur, and his sons, particularly Yahya al-Barmaki, would rise to even greater heights, with Yahya becoming the vizier of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, the most famous of the Abbasid rulers, and effectively ruling the empire in the Caliph's name for many years. The power of the Barmakids reached its peak during the reign of Harun al-Rashid, who reigned from 786 to 809 CE, and who is known to Western readers primarily through the tales of the 1001 Nights, where he appears as a romantic figure wandering the streets of Baghdad in disguise, but in reality, Harun was a shrewd and ambitious ruler who relied on the Barmakids to manage the affairs of his vast empire, and Yahya al-Barmaki, along with his sons al-Fadl and Ja'far, controlled almost every aspect of the government, from the treasury and the army to the provincial administration and the diplomatic service, and their influence was so great that the period of their ascendancy is sometimes referred to as the Barmakid century, a time when the Persian bureaucratic tradition reached the zenith of its power in the Islamic world. The Barmakids were not only administrators but also patrons of learning and culture, and they used their wealth and their influence to support scholars, poets, and translators, and their court was a gathering place for the intellectual elite of the Islamic world, where the works of Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian literature were translated into Arabic, and where the foundations of the Islamic scientific and philosophical tradition were laid, and this patronage of learning was a crucial factor in the cultural flowering of the Abbasid Golden Age, a period that saw the emergence of some of the greatest minds in human history, including the philosopher al-Kindi, the mathematician al-Khwarizmi, and the astronomer al-Farghani, all of whom benefited from the support of the Barmakids and other Persian patrons. The fall of the Barmakids, which occurred suddenly and violently in 803 CE, remains one of the great mysteries of Abbasid history, for the exact reasons for the caliph's decision to destroy the family that had served him so faithfully are still debated by scholars, with some attributing the fall to the caliph's jealousy of the Barmakids' power, others to a conspiracy by their enemies at court, and still others to a personal quarrel between Harun al-Rashid and Ja'far al-Barmaki. But whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic, for the family was stripped of its wealth and its offices, its members were imprisoned, exiled, or executed, and the Persian bureaucratic tradition that they had embodied suffered a blow from which it never fully recovered, though the influence of Persian culture on the Abbasid court continued long after the Barmakids had vanished from the scene. The fall of the Barmakids demonstrated the limits of Persian power in the Abbasid state, for it showed that the caliph, whatever his dependence on the Persian administrators, was ultimately the master, and that the authority of the vizier and the bureaucracy was derived from the caliph's will and could be withdrawn at any moment, and this lesson was not lost on the Persian administrators who succeeded the Barmakids, who learned to be more cautious in the exercise of their power, to avoid the appearance of excessive ambition, and to cultivate the favor of the caliph with greater assiduity. But the memory of the Barmakids and their great achievements lived on, and their name became a symbol of the glory and the tragedy of the Persian presence in the Abbasid court, a reminder of the heights to which the conquered could rise and the depths to which they could fall. The influence of the Barmakids on the cultural and intellectual life of the Abbasid Caliphate was profound and enduring, for their patronage of learning and the arts helped to create an environment in which the great intellectual achievements of the Islamic Golden Age could flourish, and their legacy can be seen in the works of the many scholars, poets, and scientists who benefited from their support, and who went on to make contributions that would shape the course of human civilization. The Barmakids were particularly associated with the translation movement, the great project of translating the works of Greek, Persian, and Indian scholars into Arabic, which began in earnest during the reign of al-Mansur and reached its peak under Harun al-Rashid and his successors. And it was under the patronage of the Barmakids that many of the most important works of ancient science and philosophy were made available to the Arabic-speaking world, including the works of Aristotle, Plato, Galen, and Ptolemy, as well as the great Persian and Indian works on mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, and this translation movement was one of the most important factors in the intellectual flowering of the Abbasid period, for it provided the scholars of the Islamic world with the tools and the knowledge that they needed to make their own original contributions to science and philosophy. And it also helped to preserve the works of the ancient Greeks, which would otherwise have been lost to history, and this preservation of knowledge was one of the great services that the Islamic world performed for humanity, a service that would later be repaid when the works of the Arabic scholars were translated into Latin and helped to spark the European Renaissance. The Barmakids were also great patrons of literature, and their court was a gathering place for the poets of the age, who competed with one another in the composition of panegyrics and elegies, and who celebrated the virtues of their patrons in verses that are still read and admired today. And this patronage of poetry was not simply a matter of entertainment, for the poets played an important role in the political and cultural life of the court, serving as propagandists for the regime, as chroniclers of its achievements, and as arbiters of taste and language, and the standards of excellence that were established during this period would influence the development of Arabic literature for centuries to come. The Barmakids were also associated with the development of the system of land taxation, which was one of the most important functions of the Abbasid state, and they introduced reforms that made the collection of taxes more efficient and more equitable, and these reforms helped to increase the revenues of the state, which in turn made it possible to finance the great building projects, the military campaigns, and the cultural institutions that were the glory of the Abbasid age, and the expertise of the Barmakids in matters of finance and administration was widely recognized, and their methods were studied and imitated by later generations of administrators, who looked back to the Barmakid period as a golden age of good government. The story of the Barmakids is thus not merely a tale of political intrigue and personal ambition but a crucial chapter in the history of civilization, for the family's contributions to the development of Islamic administration, culture, and learning were immense, and their influence can be traced in the many institutions and traditions that they helped to create. And their memory continued to inspire later generations of Persian administrators and scholars, who saw in the Barmakids a model of what could be achieved through talent, education, and loyalty to the state, and this model of the cultured and competent administrator, dedicated to the service of the public good, remains a powerful ideal in the political culture of the Middle East to this day. The transformation of the Abbasid court from a relatively simple and egalitarian assembly of Arab chieftains into a highly ceremonial and hierarchical institution was one of the most visible signs of the Persianization of the Caliphate, and this transformation was driven by the deliberate adoption of the rituals, symbols, and protocols of the Sasanian monarchy, which had developed over centuries a sophisticated system of court ceremonial that was designed to emphasize the power and the majesty of the sovereign. The early Umayyad caliphs had governed in a manner that was relatively informal by the standards of the ancient imperial courts, for they were still rooted in the traditions of the Arab tribal society, in which the leader was expected to be accessible to his followers and to consult with them on matters of importance. And the Umayyad court in Damascus, while it was certainly not without ceremony, did not possess the elaborate hierarchy and the rigid protocols that would later characterize the Abbasid court. The Abbasid caliphs, however, particularly after the foundation of Baghdad, began to model their court on the example of the Sasanian kings, and they adopted many of the practices that had been used to enhance the prestige and the authority of the Persian monarch, including the use of a throne, the separation of the sovereign from the public by means of curtains and screens, the requirement that visitors approach the caliph with displays of extreme deference, and the use of elaborate robes, crowns, and other symbols of authority. And these practices were introduced by the Persian advisors and courtiers who had been brought into the Abbasid administration, and who saw in these rituals a means of strengthening the power of the state, and of protecting the person of the caliph from the dangers of excessive familiarity. The introduction of these court rituals was not simply a matter of aesthetic preference but a deliberate political strategy, for the hierarchical court served to distance the caliph from the mass of his subjects, to create an aura of mystery and majesty around his person, and to emphasize the vast gulf that separated the ruler from the ruled, and this strategy was highly effective. For it transformed the caliph from a first among equals into a figure of almost divine authority, whose presence was considered a privilege and whose words were treated as commands that must be obeyed without question. And this transformation of the caliph's image was a crucial step in the consolidation of Abbasid power, for it discouraged rebellion and encouraged submission, and it helped to create a political culture in which the authority of the state was accepted as a natural and necessary part of the order of the world. The influence of Persian court culture was also evident in the development of the Caliphate palace, which was designed as a vast and magnificent complex, with separate sections for the public audience halls, the private apartments of the caliph, the offices of the administration, and the quarters of the servants and the guards. And this separation of functions was a reflection of the hierarchical order of the court, in which access to the caliph was strictly controlled, and in which each individual had a designated place in the complex structure of the state, and the architecture of the palace, with its courtyards, its gardens, and its fountains, was itself a symbol of the caliph's power and his ability to command the resources of the empire, and it was consciously modeled on the palaces of the Sasanian kings, which had been famous throughout the world for their beauty and their grandeur. The adoption of Persian court ceremonial was not without its critics, for some pious Muslims objected to the introduction of practices that they considered to be un-Islamic, arguing that the caliph should be a humble servant of God rather than a majestic monarch, and that the elaborate rituals of the Persian court were a form of idolatry that contradicted the egalitarian spirit of Islam. But these objections were largely ignored by the Abbasid caliphs, who recognized the practical value of these rituals in maintaining order and in projecting an image of strength and authority, and the Persianized court of Baghdad became the model that was imitated by other Muslim rulers throughout the Islamic world, from the Umayyads of Spain to the Fatimids of Egypt, and this imitation helped to spread the Persian conception of monarchy far beyond the borders of the Caliphate. And it left a lasting mark on the political culture of the Islamic world, a mark that can still be seen today in the ceremonial practices of many Muslim states. The hierarchical nature of the Abbasid court was reinforced by the development of a complex system of titles, ranks, and privileges, which served to distinguish the various members of the court and the administration from one another, and to create a clear chain of command that extended from the caliph at the top to the lowliest servant at the bottom. And this system was directly influenced by the Persian tradition, which had long emphasized the importance of social hierarchy and the proper ordering of ranks, and the Persians had developed a rich vocabulary of titles and honorifics that the Abbasids adopted and adapted to their own needs. The caliph himself was given a series of honorific titles, such as the Commander of the Faithful and the Shadow of God on Earth, which were designed to emphasize his religious and political authority, and these titles were supplemented by the use of regnal names, which the caliphs assumed upon their accession to the throne. And this practice of taking a special name to mark the beginning of a new reign was also borrowed from the Persian tradition, where the Sasanian kings had adopted throne names that reflected their ambitions and their aspirations, and the use of these names helped to create a sense of continuity and legitimacy, linking the new ruler to the great kings of the past. The members of the court were also given titles and ranks, which determined their position in the hierarchy and their access to the caliph. And these titles were often derived from Persian words, such as Amir, meaning commander, Hajib, meaning chamberlain, and Wazir, meaning vizier, and the use of these Persian terms in the Arabic-speaking court was a clear sign of the influence of Persian culture on the political language of the Caliphate, and it reflected the fact that the Persian administrators and courtiers had become so deeply integrated into the Abbasid state that their language and their concepts had become part of the fabric of the government. The adoption of Persian titles and protocols was not simply a superficial borrowing but a fundamental change in the way that the Caliphate was conceived and governed, for the hierarchical court of Baghdad was a very different institution from the relatively egalitarian court of the early caliphs. And this change reflected the broader transformation of the Abbasid state from a tribal confederation into an imperial monarchy, a transformation that was made possible by the contributions of the Persian administrators who brought with them the traditions and the values of the ancient Persian Empire, and who applied these traditions to the task of building a new Islamic state that was capable of governing a vast and diverse empire. And this transformation was one of the most important developments in the history of the Islamic world, for it laid the foundations for the great achievements of the Abbasid Golden Age. And it created a model of government that would be imitated by later Muslim rulers for centuries to come, and it is a model that continues to influence the political culture of the Middle East to this day, a living legacy of the Persian conquest of the conquerors. The concept of the just king, which lay at the heart of the Persian political tradition, was one of the most important ideas that the Abbasids absorbed from their Iranian subjects, and it profoundly shaped the way that the caliphs understood their role and their responsibilities, transforming the office of the caliph from a primarily military and religious leadership into a broader conception of imperial rule that emphasized the importance of justice, the protection of the weak, and the maintenance of order. The ancient Persian idea of the king as the guardian of justice and the protector of the people was deeply rooted in the Zoroastrian tradition, which saw the world as a battleground between the forces of good and evil, and which taught that the king, as the representative of the good god Ahura Mazda, had a sacred duty to combat evil and to establish justice on earth. And this conception of kingship was elaborated in the political literature of the Sasanian period, particularly in the works of advice known as the Testaments of the ancient kings, which were collected and transmitted to the Islamic world after the Arab conquest. The most famous of these works was the Letter of Tansar, attributed to a Sasanian priest and minister, and the Testament of Ardashir, which purported to contain the advice of the founder of the Sasanian dynasty to his successors, and these works emphasize the importance of the king as the source of justice, the necessity of maintaining a strong and efficient administration, and the dangers of tyranny and oppression, and they circulated widely in the Islamic world, where they were translated into Arabic and studied by the Abbasid caliphs and their advisors, who found in them a compelling vision of the ideal ruler. The Persian concept of the king's responsibility for justice was expressed in a famous saying that was attributed to the ancient Persian kings and that was frequently quoted in the Arabic political literature. The power depends on the peasantry, The peasantry depends on justice, and justice depends on the king. And this saying captured the essential interdependence of the ruler and his subjects, for it taught that the prosperity of the state depended on the well-being of the peasantry, and that the well-being of the peasantry depended on the justice of the king, and that the justice of the king depended on his exercise of power, and this circular relationship between power, justice, and prosperity was the foundation of the Persian theory of government, and it was a theory that the Abbasids found extremely attractive. For it provided a philosophical justification for their own rule and a practical guide for the administration of their empire. The Abbasid caliphs, particularly the early rulers such as al-Mansur and Harun al-Rashid, consciously presented themselves as just rulers in the Persian tradition, and they took great care to ensure that their courts were open to the complaints of the people, that their officials were held accountable for their actions, and that the rights of the taxpayers were protected from the abuses of corrupt administrators. And this commitment to justice was not simply a matter of propaganda but a genuine political program, for the caliphs recognized that the stability of their regime depended on the contentment of their subjects, and that the most effective way to prevent rebellion was to rule justly, and this recognition was itself a reflection of the influence of the Persian political tradition, which taught that the king who neglects justice will lose his throne. The concept of far, the divine glory that was believed to rest upon the legitimate ruler, was another important Persian idea that was adopted and adapted by the Abbasids. For the ancient Iranians believed that the king was not merely a human being but a vessel of divine favor, a man upon whom the gods had conferred a special charisma that distinguished him from ordinary mortals and that made his rule legitimate. And this concept was translated into Islamic terms by the Abbasids, who presented themselves as the chosen representatives of God, the defenders of the faith, and the guardians of the community, and who used the concept of divine favor to justify their authority and to demand the obedience of their subjects. And this blending of Persian and Islamic ideas of legitimacy was a crucial factor in the consolidation of Abbasid power. For it allowed the caliphs to draw on the deep well of Persian political tradition while remaining firmly within the framework of Islamic orthodoxy. And this synthesis of traditions was one of the great achievements of the Abbasid age, and it is a reminder of the creative power of cultural exchange. The literature of advice, which came to be known in the Islamic world as the Mirrors for Princes, was one of the most important vehicles for the transmission of Persian political ideas to the Abbasid court, and these works, which were written in both Arabic and Persian, provided the caliphs and their administrators with a comprehensive guide to the art of government, covering everything from the selection of ministers and the management of the treasury to the treatment of the peasantry and the conduct of war, and they drew heavily on the traditions of the ancient Persian kings, whose wisdom was believed to be the accumulated experience of centuries of imperial rule. The Mirrors for Princes were not simply collections of dry administrative maxims but were often presented in the form of stories, parables, and dialogues, in which the advice was illustrated by examples from the lives of the ancient kings, and these stories were designed to be both instructive and entertaining, capturing the imagination of the reader while conveying the essential principles of good government. And the use of narrative as a vehicle for political instruction was itself a Persian tradition, for the ancient Iranians had a rich literature of courtly tales and fables that were used to educate the young princes and to advise the rulers. And this tradition was continued in the Islamic period, when the Persian stories of the ancient kings were translated into Arabic and incorporated into the body of Arabic literature. The most famous of these Persian-inspired works of advice was the Kabasnama, written by the Ziyarid prince Khorasan in the 11th century, but it was preceded by a number of earlier works that were produced in the Abbasid period, including the Al-Adab al-Kabir of Ibn al-Makaffa, a Persian convert to Islam who was one of the most important figures in the transmission of Persian wisdom to the Arabic-speaking world, and Ibn al-Makaffa's works, which included translations of the Persian Book of Kings and of the Indian fables of Kalila wa Dimna, were enormously influential, for they introduced the Arabic-speaking public to the political and ethical ideas of the Persian tradition, and they established a model of elegant Arabic prose that would be imitated by later writers. And the Al-Adab al-Kabir, in particular, was a masterpiece of advice literature, a work that distilled the wisdom of the ancient Persian kings into a series of memorable maxims and parables that were designed to guide the ruler in his conduct of the affairs of state. The influence of the Mirrors for Princes on the political culture of the Abbasid Caliphate was profound, for these works provided the intellectual framework for the Persianized conception of government that dominated the court, and they were studied by the caliphs, the viziers, and the secretaries, who found in them a source of practical wisdom and a justification for their own role as the guardians of the public interest. And the ideas contained in these works, such as the importance of justice, the necessity of consulting with wise advisors, and the dangers of arbitrary power, became part of the common currency of political discourse in the Islamic world, and they continued to influence the political thought of the region for centuries. And their legacy can be seen in the many works of advice that were produced in the later medieval period and in the political rhetoric of the modern Middle East, where the ideal of the just ruler remains a powerful force in the public imagination, a force that is rooted in the ancient Persian tradition that was transmitted to the Islamic world through the Mirrors for Princes and through the other works of advice literature that were produced in the Abbasid age. And this transmission of knowledge is one of the great cultural achievements of the Islamic civilization. An achievement that was made possible by the synthesis of the Arab and Persian traditions that occurred in the courts of the Abbasid caliphs. The translation movement, which flourished in Baghdad during the Abbasid period, was one of the greatest intellectual enterprises in human history, and it was a direct result of the fusion of cultures that took place in the capital, for the project of translating the works of the ancient Greeks, Persians, and Indians into Arabic was driven by the desire of the Abbasid caliphs and their Persian advisors to preserve and to build upon the knowledge of the past, and it was made possible by the existence of a cosmopolitan community of scholars, translators, and patrons who were drawn from a variety of religious and ethnic backgrounds, and who worked together in a spirit of open inquiry and intellectual curiosity that was unmatched anywhere else in the world at the time. The translation movement began in earnest during the reign of al-Mansur, the founder of Baghdad, who was personally interested in the sciences of the ancients, particularly astronomy and medicine, and who commissioned the translation of a number of important works, including the astronomical tables of the Indian astronomer Brahmagupta and the medical works of the Greek physician Galen. And this early interest in the sciences was continued and expanded by his successors, particularly Harun al-Rashid and his son al-Mamun, who established the famous House of Wisdom, the Beit al-Hikmah, in Baghdad, which became the center of the translation movement and the most important intellectual institution in the Islamic world. The House of Wisdom was not simply a library or a scriptorium but a research institute, where scholars from all over the world gathered to translate, to study, and to debate, and it was staffed by a remarkable group of men, including the great translator Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Christian Arab who was perhaps the greatest translator of the age, and the Persian scholar al-Khwarizmi, whose work on algebra would give the world the term algorithm. And these scholars, working under the patronage of the Caliph and the Persian viziers, produced translations of an astonishing range of works, covering philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, geography, and literature, and these translations laid the foundations for the great achievements of Islamic science and philosophy, which would later be transmitted to Europe and would help to spark the Renaissance. The Persian contribution to the translation movement was particularly important, for the Persians had a long tradition of scholarship and learning that went back to the Achaemenid period, and they had preserved many of the works of the ancient world, including the works of the Greek philosophers and scientists, which had been translated into Persian during the Sasanian period, and these Persian translations, along with the original Greek manuscripts that were brought to Baghdad from the libraries of the ancient world, provided the raw material for the Arabic translation movement, and the Persian scholars themselves played a crucial role in the translation process, for they were often the ones who knew both the ancient languages and the Arabic language, and they were able to bridge the gap between the cultures, and their contributions were essential to the success of the enterprise. The translation of Persian works into Arabic was also a major part of the movement, for the Abbasids were eager to learn from the Persian tradition, and they commissioned translations of the great Persian historical and literary works, including the Quadamnamic, the Book of Kings, which contained the history of the Persian kings from the mythical beginnings to the end of the Sasanian Dynasty, and this work, which was translated into Arabic by Ibn al-Makaffa and others, provided the raw material for the later Persian epic, the Shahnameh, of Ferdowsi, and it also served as a source of instruction and inspiration for the Abbasid caliphs, who saw in the stories of the ancient Persian kings a model of the ideal ruler and a source of political wisdom, and the translation of this work was a crucial step in the transmission of the Persian imperial tradition to the Islamic world. A tradition that would profoundly shape the political and cultural development of the Caliphate. The translation movement was thus not simply a scholarly enterprise but a political and cultural project, a project that was driven by the desire of the Abbasids to create a civilization that was capable of rivaling and surpassing the achievements of the ancient empires, and the Persians, who had been the heirs of one of those empires, were the essential partners in this project, for they brought to it their knowledge, their skills, and their cultural memory, and their contribution was so significant that it is fair to say that without the Persians, the translation movement would not have been possible, and without the translation movement, the achievements of the Islamic Golden Age would have been impossible, and the course of human history would have been very different. The movement known as the Umayyad, which emerged in the early Abbasid period, was a direct expression of the cultural and political tensions that accompanied the rise of the Persian influence in the Caliphate, for it was a literary and intellectual movement that sought to defend the dignity and the achievements of the non-Arab peoples, particularly the Persians, against the claims of Arab superiority that had been entrenched during the Umayyad period, and it produced a rich body of literature that celebrated the history, the culture, and the values of the Persians, and that argued for a more inclusive and universal conception of Islamic identity. The name, Umayyad, is derived from the Quranic term, Shu'ab, which means peoples or nations, and it refers to a verse in the Quran that states that God has made humanity into peoples and tribes, so that they might know one another, and the Shu'ab writers used this verse to argue that the distinctions between Arabs and non-Arabs were not a matter of superiority or inferiority, but a reflection of the diversity of God's creation, and that the true measure of a person's worth was not their ethnic origin but their piety and their contribution to the community. And this argument was a direct challenge to the Arab chauvinism that had been a feature of the Umayyad regime, and it resonated deeply with the Persian converts to Islam, who had long felt marginalized and excluded by the Arab-dominated political system. The Shu'ab writers, many of whom were themselves of Persian descent, produced works that celebrated the achievements of the ancient Persian civilization, including its literature, its science, its art, and its political institutions, and they argued that the Persians had a civilization that was as old and as sophisticated as any in the world, and that the Arabs, far from being the sole heirs of civilization, had in fact learned much from the Persians and from the other peoples that they had conquered, and this argument was a powerful assertion of cultural pride, and it helped to foster a sense of Persian identity that was distinct from, but not opposed to, the identity of the Islamic community as a whole, and this sense of dual identity, Persian and Muslim, would become a characteristic feature of the Iranian cultural tradition, and it would find its fullest expression in the great works of Persian literature that would be produced in the following centuries, including the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi. The Umayyad was not a unified movement with a single program or a single leader, but rather a broad current of opinion that found expression in a variety of literary and intellectual forms, and its participants included some of the most prominent writers and scholars of the age, including the great prose stylist Ibn al-Makaffa, who was himself a Persian convert, and who used his works to defend the Persian tradition and to advocate for a more inclusive Islamic society, and the movement also included many poets, who composed verses that celebrated the glories of the Persian past and that mocked the pretensions of the Arab chauvinists, and these poets engaged in a famous literary debate with the defenders of Arab superiority, a debate that was conducted in the form of poems, essays, and public disputations, and that helped to define the cultural landscape of the Abbasid period. And this debate was not simply a matter of literary rivalry but a reflection of the deeper social and political tensions that were shaping the new Islamic society, tensions that would continue to influence the history of the region for centuries to come. The Shuyubiya was ultimately absorbed into the broader culture of the Abbasid period, for the rise of the Persian influence in the court and the growing cosmopolitanism of the Islamic world made the old distinctions between Arab and non-Arab less and less relevant, and the movement's emphasis on the importance of cultural diversity and the equality of all believers became part of the mainstream of Islamic thought. And its legacy can be seen in the many works of Persian literature and scholarship that were produced in the following centuries, works that celebrated the heritage of the Persian people while remaining firmly within the framework of Islamic civilization. And this synthesis of Persian and Islamic identities is one of the great achievements of the Abbasid age, an achievement that was made possible by the openness and the tolerance of the new society that emerged from the revolution. A society in which the conquered and the conquerors were able to come together to create something new and enduring. The phrase, "The Persians conquer the conquerors," is a powerful metaphor for the cultural and administrative transformation that took place in the Abbasid Caliphate, for it captures the essence of a process in which the defeated people of the Sasanian Empire, having lost their political independence and their royal dynasty, nevertheless succeeded in imposing their language of government, their bureaucratic methods, their court rituals, and their conception of kingship upon their Arab conquerors, thereby achieving a victory that was far more enduring than any military conquest could have been. This conquest was not achieved through force of arms but through the quiet and patient work of the administrators, the secretaries, the scholars, and the courtiers who entered the service of the new Islamic State and who used their skills and their knowledge to shape the institutions and the culture of the Caliphate. And their success was due in large part to the fact that the Arab conquerors, for all their military prowess, had no experience in governing a vast and complex empire, and they were therefore forced to rely on the expertise of the people they had conquered, and in relying on the Persians, they inevitably absorbed many of the Persian ways of doing things, and this absorption, over time, transformed the very character of the Islamic State, making it more Persian in its methods and its outlook, even as it remained Islamic in its faith and Arab in its language. The process of Persianization was not a sudden or a deliberate takeover but a gradual and organic process, a process of mutual adaptation and cultural exchange, in which the Persians learned to speak Arabic and to embrace Islam, while the Arabs learned to appreciate the achievements of Persian civilization and to adopt many of its practices. And this process was facilitated by the fact that the Abbasid caliphs, unlike their Umayyad predecessors, were open to the contributions of non-Arabs, and they actively recruited Persians into the highest offices of the state, and this policy of inclusion, which was a product of the revolution itself, created the conditions for the Persian influence to flourish, and it allowed the Persians to rise to positions of power and influence from which they could shape the destiny of the empire. The most visible sign of the Persian conquest of the conquerors was the transformation of the Caliphate's government, which came to be organized on the model of the Sasanian administration, with a powerful vizier at the head of the bureaucracy, a network of government departments known as diwans, and a class of trained secretaries known as kutab, who were responsible for the day-to-day management of the state. And this bureaucratic structure, which was entirely foreign to the Arab tribal tradition, was a direct import from the Persian imperial system, and it was staffed largely by men of Persian descent, who brought with them the habits of precision, order, and efficiency that had been the hallmarks of the Sasanian administration, and this bureaucratic system was so effective that it enabled the caliphs to govern an empire that stretched from the Atlantic to the borders of India. And it became the model for all subsequent Muslim states, a model that would endure for centuries, and that would leave a lasting mark on the political culture of the Islamic world. The Persian conquest of the conquerors was also evident in the cultural sphere, for the Abbasid court became a center of Persian learning and Persian taste, where the poetry, the music, and the literature of the ancient Persian tradition were celebrated and imitated, and where the Persian language, which had been the language of the defeated empire, began to reassert itself as a language of high culture. First in the eastern provinces and later throughout the Islamic world, and this cultural revival, which culminated in the great works of Persian literature such as the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi, was a direct result of the Persian influence on the Abbasid court, and it ensured that the Persian language and the Persian culture would survive and flourish long after the political power of the Caliphate had declined. And this survival of the Persian tradition is one of the most remarkable achievements of the Islamic civilization, an achievement that was made possible by the quiet conquest of the conquerors that took place in the courts and the offices of the Abbasid state. The concept of a hybrid civilization is essential to understanding the nature of the Abbasid Caliphate, for the society that emerged from the fusion of Arab and Persian cultures was neither purely one nor the other but a unique synthesis that combined the religious and linguistic heritage of the Arabs with the administrative and cultural traditions of the Persians. And this synthesis was the foundation of the great achievements of the Islamic Golden Age, and it is a model of cultural exchange that remains relevant in the modern world, where the encounter between different civilizations is a constant feature of global life. The hybrid nature of the Abbasid civilization was evident in every aspect of its life, from the architecture of its cities, which combined the forms of the Arab mosque with the proportions and the decoration of the Persian palace, to the literature of its poets, who wrote in Arabic but drew on the themes and the imagery of the Persian tradition, and to the science of its scholars, who built on the foundations of Greek and Indian learning that had been preserved and transmitted by the Persians. And this blending of traditions was not a sign of weakness but a source of strength, for it allowed the Abbasid civilization to draw on the resources of multiple cultures and to create something that was greater than the sum of its parts. And this creativity was the hallmark of the age, an age in which the greatest minds of the Islamic world were able to make original contributions to philosophy, science, and literature precisely because they were able to stand on the shoulders of the giants of the past, regardless of whether those giants were Greek, Persian, or Indian. The hybridity of the Abbasid society was also evident in its social structure, for the old distinctions between Arab and non-Arab, which had been so important in the Umayyad period, gradually gave way to a more fluid and cosmopolitan society, in which men of Persian descent rose to the highest offices of the state, and in which intermarriage between Arabs and Persians became common. And this social integration was a direct result of the policies of the Abbasid caliphs, who recognized that the strength of their empire depended on the loyalty of all their subjects, regardless of their ethnic origin, and who therefore sought to create a unified Muslim community in which the differences of language and culture were subordinated to the common bond of faith. And this vision of a universal Islamic community, in which all believers were equal before God, was one of the great ideals of the age. And it was an ideal that the Persians themselves embraced, for it allowed them to participate fully in the life of the state, while retaining their own cultural identity. And this dual identity, Persian and Muslim, became a characteristic feature of the Iranian experience, and it would produce some of the greatest achievements of the Islamic civilization, including the poetry of Rumi, the philosophy of Avicenna, and the architecture of Isfahan. And this legacy is a testament to the power of cultural hybridity to produce extraordinary results, and it is a reminder that the encounter between different cultures, when it is conducted in a spirit of openness and mutual respect, can be a source of creativity and renewal, rather than a source of conflict and destruction. The revival of the Persian language as a literary medium was one of the most important cultural developments of the early Islamic period, and it was a direct result of the Persian influence on the Abbasid court, for the Persian administrators and scholars who had risen to prominence in the Caliphate did not abandon their native language, but continued to use it in private and in the eastern provinces. And they began to cultivate a new form of Persian, known as New Persian, which was written in the Arabic script but which preserved the grammar and the vocabulary of the ancient language, and this New Persian would eventually become the vehicle for a great literary tradition, a tradition that would produce some of the finest poetry and prose in the history of world literature. The process of the revival of the Persian language was gradual, for the first centuries after the Arab conquest saw the dominance of Arabic as the language of government, religion, and high culture, and the Persian language was largely confined to the oral tradition and to the private sphere. But the Persians never forgot their language, and they continued to tell the stories of their ancient kings and heroes in their own tongue. And these stories were passed down from generation to generation, and they would later be collected and written down in the great epics of the Persian tradition, including the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi, which would become the national epic of Iran and one of the masterpieces of world literature. And the survival of these stories through the centuries of Arab rule was a remarkable achievement, a testament to the resilience of the Persian cultural memory. And it was made possible by the fact that the Persian language was never completely extinguished, but continued to be spoken and cherished in the homes and the villages of the Iranian plateau, even as Arabic became the language of the court and the city. The revival of Persian as a literary language began in earnest in the 9th and 10th centuries, in the eastern provinces of the Islamic world, particularly in the region of Khorasan and Transoxiana, where the Samanid dynasty, a Persian dynasty that ruled in the name of the Abbasid caliphs, began to patronize poets and writers who composed in the new Persian language, and the Samanids, who were themselves of Persian descent and who were proud of their heritage, saw the cultivation of the Persian language as a way of asserting their cultural identity and of celebrating the achievements of their ancestors, and they sponsored the compilation of the great Persian epics and the translation of the ancient Persian histories into the new language, and this patronage was crucial to the development of the literary tradition. For it provided the poets and the writers with the support and the encouragement that they needed to produce their works, and the Samanid court became a center of Persian literary activity, where the great poets of the age, including Radaki, the father of Persian poetry, composed their verses, and where the foundations of the Persian literary renaissance were laid, and this renaissance would culminate in the work of Ferdowsi, who dedicated 30 years of his life to the composition of the Shahnameh, the epic that would preserve the memory of the Persian kings and heroes for future generations, and that would become the cornerstone of the Persian cultural identity. And the fact that Ferdowsi was able to complete this monumental work, despite the political turmoil and the cultural pressures of his time, is a testament to the strength of the Persian literary tradition and to the determination of the Persian people to preserve their heritage. And the Shahnameh remains to this day one of the most beloved and most influential works in the Persian language. A work that is read and recited in homes and schools throughout the Persian-speaking world, and that continues to inspire new generations of writers and artists, and this enduring popularity is a measure of the power of the Persian revival, a revival that was made possible by the cultural synthesis of the Abbasid period, in which the Persian language was able to find a new life within the framework of the Islamic civilization, and this synthesis is one of the great achievements of the age. An achievement that would have been impossible without the Persian influence on the Abbasid court. The rise of the Persian language was not a rejection of Arabic or of the Islamic faith, for the Persians remained deeply committed to Islam and to the Arabic language, which they continued to use in their religious and scholarly activities, but it was an assertion of the value and the dignity of their own cultural heritage. A declaration that the Persian language and the Persian literary tradition were worthy of respect and of cultivation, and this assertion of cultural identity within the framework of a universal religion was a characteristic feature of the Iranian experience, and it would produce a body of literature that is remarkable for its beauty, its depth, and its humanity, and that stands as one of the great achievements of the Islamic civilization. The Persian poets and writers of the medieval period, from Radaki and Ferdowsi to Rumi and Hafez, were deeply influenced by the Islamic faith, and their works are filled with references to the Quran and to the traditions of the Prophet, but they also drew on the rich heritage of the ancient Persian tradition, with its emphasis on the beauty of nature, the importance of love, and the transience of human life. And this blending of Islamic and Persian elements produced a literature that is both profoundly religious and profoundly human, a literature that speaks to the deepest concerns of the human heart, and that continues to resonate with readers around the world. And the ability of these poets to create such a synthesis is a testament to the openness and the creativity of the Islamic civilization, a civilization that was able to absorb and to transform the cultures that it encountered, and to create something new and beautiful out of the encounter. And this creativity is one of the great legacies of the Abbasid period, a legacy that is still alive in the literature, the art, and the architecture of the Islamic world, and that continues to inspire and to enrich the lives of millions of people. And this legacy is a reminder of the power of cultural exchange to produce extraordinary results, and of the importance of preserving and celebrating the diversity of human cultures. For it is in the encounter between different traditions that the greatest achievements of civilization are often born, and the story of the Persian conquest of the Conquerors is a perfect illustration of this truth, a story of how a defeated people, through the power of their culture and their knowledge, were able to reshape the civilization of their conquerors and to leave a lasting mark on the history of the world. The limits of Persianization are as important to understand as the extent of the Persian influence, for the Abbasid Caliphate was never simply a Persian empire in disguise, and the Arab caliphs, despite their reliance on Persian administrators and their adoption of Persian court rituals, remained firmly in control of the state. And they were willing and able to assert their authority whenever they felt that the power of the Persian officials had become too great, as the dramatic fall of the Barmakids so clearly demonstrated. The political structure of the Abbasid Caliphate was based on the principle of the caliph's absolute authority, for the caliph was not merely the head of the government but the successor to the Prophet Muhammad and the leader of the Muslim community, and his legitimacy was derived from his religious office, not from the consent of the governed or from the support of the bureaucracy. And this religious dimension of the caliph's power was a crucial check on the ambitions of the Persian administrators, who could never hope to replace the caliph or to rule in their own name, for they lacked the religious charisma that was essential to the office of the caliph, and they knew that their power was entirely dependent on the caliph's favor, and that this favor could be withdrawn at any moment, and this knowledge kept them in a state of perpetual insecurity. And it prevented them from ever challenging the fundamental structure of the state, even as they dominated its day-to-day operations. The tension between the Arab caliphs and their Persian administrators was a constant feature of the Abbasid period, for the caliphs were always aware of the potential threat posed by the powerful bureaucrats who served them, and they took care to balance the influence of the Persian officials with that of other groups, including the Arab military commanders, the Turkish slave soldiers, and the religious scholars. And this balancing act was essential to the survival of the dynasty, for it prevented any single group from becoming powerful enough to challenge the caliph, and it also created a complex and often unstable political environment, in which alliances shifted and factions competed for influence. And this political complexity was a source of both strength and weakness, for it allowed the caliphate to adapt to changing circumstances. But it also made it vulnerable to internal conflicts, and to the ambitions of rival factions, and these conflicts would eventually contribute to the decline of the caliphate, as the military and the bureaucracy came to dominate the state and to reduce the caliph to a figurehead. But this decline was a gradual process, and for the first 2 centuries of Abbasid rule, the caliphs were able to maintain their authority and to preside over a period of unprecedented prosperity and cultural achievement. And this achievement was due in no small part to the contributions of the Persian administrators, who served the caliphs with loyalty and skill, and who helped to build the institutions that made the Golden Age possible, and their story is a testament to the possibility of cooperation between different cultures within the framework of a shared faith and a common civilization. The relationship between the center and the provinces was another area where the limits of Persianization were evident, for while the Persian influence was strong in the central administration in Baghdad, the provinces of the Caliphate retained their own local traditions and their own local elites, and the control of the central government over the provinces was often limited, particularly in the distant regions of the empire, where the authority of the caliph was mediated by local governors and by the leaders of the local communities. And this decentralization of power was a constant source of tension, for the caliphs sought to assert their authority over the entire empire, while the local elites sought to preserve their autonomy, and this tension was a feature of the entire history of the caliphate, and it contributed to the eventual fragmentation of the empire. As the provinces gradually broke away from the control of Baghdad and established their own independent dynasties, many of which were of Persian origin, and these dynasties, while they acknowledged the nominal authority of the caliph, were in practice independent rulers, and they pursued their own interests and their own policies. And this fragmentation was a sign of the limits of the centralization that the Persians had helped to create. For the bureaucratic system that they had built was not strong enough to hold the vast empire together indefinitely, and the forces of localism and separatism eventually proved to be too powerful, and the empire that the Abbasids and their Persian administrators had built slowly disintegrated. But the legacy of that empire, and of the cultural synthesis that it had produced, lived on in the many successor states that emerged from its ruins, and the Persian language and the Persian culture continued to flourish in these states. And the ideals of government, that had been developed in the Abbasid court continued to influence the political thought of the region, and this continuity is a reminder that the achievements of a civilization are not measured solely by its political power or its military success, but by the ideas and the institutions that it creates and that endure long after the empire has fallen. And in this sense, the Persian conquest of the conquerors was a lasting victory, a victory of culture over politics, of ideas over force, and of memory over time. And it is a victory that continues to shape the world in which we live. The Abbasid Caliphate, as it evolved under the influence of the Persian tradition, came to represent a new form of empire, one that was distinct from the Sasanian monarchy that had preceded it but that also drew heavily on the Sasanian model. And this new form of empire was characterized by a centralized bureaucracy, a hierarchical court, and an ideology of justice that was expressed in both Islamic and Persian terms. And it proved to be remarkably successful, for it enabled the caliphs to govern a vast and diverse territory for over 5 centuries, and to create a civilization that was one of the most advanced in the world. And this success was due in large part to the ability of the Abbasid state to combine the universal message of Islam with the practical wisdom of the Persian administrative tradition. And this combination produced a system of government that was both efficient and legitimate, and that was able to command the loyalty of its subjects across ethnic and religious lines. And this system became the model for subsequent Muslim states, from the Fatimids in Egypt to the Ottomans in Anatolia, and its influence can still be seen in the political institutions of the modern Middle East, a testament to the enduring power of the synthesis that was achieved in the Abbasid period. The new form of empire that emerged from the Abbasid Revolution was not simply a restoration of the Sasanian state, for the Caliphate was founded on the principles of the Islamic faith, and the Caliph was not a Zoroastrian king but the successor to the Prophet Muhammad, and this religious dimension of the Caliph's office fundamentally distinguished it from the Sasanian monarchy. Even as the Abbasids adopted many of the administrative and ceremonial practices of the Persian kings, and this distinction was important, for it meant that the Abbasid caliphs could not simply claim the mantle of the ancient Persian kings, but had to justify their rule in Islamic terms, and this necessity forced them to develop a new political ideology, one that combined the universal message of Islam with the imperial traditions of the Persians. And this ideology was elaborated in the works of the court scholars and the political theorists, who drew on both Islamic and Persian sources to create a vision of the state that was both religious and imperial. And this vision was a crucial factor in the success of the Abbasid Empire, for it provided the caliphs with a legitimacy that was recognized by both the Arab and the Persian elites, and it allowed them to present themselves as the defenders of the faith and the heirs of the ancient kings, and this dual legitimacy was the foundation of their power. And it was a direct result of the cultural synthesis that took place in the Abbasid court. A synthesis that was made possible by the contributions of the Persian administrators and scholars who brought their traditions to the service of the new Islamic state, and who helped to create an ideology that was greater than the sum of its parts. And this ideology of the Islamic Empire, with its emphasis on justice, order, and the rule of law, would have a profound influence on the political thought of the Islamic world. And it would continue to shape the institutions of the Muslim states for centuries. And its legacy can be seen in the many works of political theory that were produced in the Islamic world, works that combined the teachings of the Quran with the wisdom of the Persian kings, and that provided a model of good government that was both Islamic and universal, and this model remains a powerful ideal in the political culture of the region. An ideal that is rooted in the achievements of the Abbasid age and in the cultural synthesis that made those achievements possible. The comparison between the Sasanian and the Abbasid empires is instructive, for it reveals both the continuities and the differences between the two systems, and it highlights the ways in which the Persian tradition was transformed in the context of the Islamic civilization, and this comparison is essential to understanding the nature of the Abbasid achievement. For it shows that the Abbasid caliphs were not simply imitators of the Persian kings but innovators who adapted the Persian model to the requirements of a new religious and political order, and who created something that was both familiar and new, and this creativity was the hallmark of the Abbasid age, an age that was characterized by a remarkable openness to new ideas and new influences, and by a willingness to learn from the past while looking to the future, and this spirit of innovation and adaptation was the key to the success of the Abbasid Empire. And it is a model that is as relevant today as it was in the 8th century, a model of cultural exchange and synthesis that can inspire us to build a more open and inclusive world, a world in which the achievements of different civilizations are recognized and celebrated, and in which the encounter between cultures is seen not as a threat but as an opportunity for growth and enrichment. And the story of the Persian conquest of the conquerors is a powerful illustration of this truth. A story that reminds us that the greatest achievements of human civilization are often the product of collaboration and exchange between different peoples and different traditions, and that the walls that we build between ourselves are often the greatest obstacles to our own progress, and that the bridges that we build between cultures are the pathways to a better future. And this is a lesson that we would do well to remember in our own time. When the world is increasingly interconnected and when the need for understanding and cooperation between different cultures has never been greater, and the example of the Abbasid Golden Age, with its remarkable fusion of Arab and Persian elements, stands as a beacon of hope, a reminder that it is possible to build a civilization that is both diverse and unified, and that the encounter between different cultures can be a source of strength rather than a source of conflict. And this is the legacy of the Persian administrators and scholars who served the Abbasid caliphs, a legacy that continues to inspire and to illuminate. And that reminds us of the power of culture to transcend the boundaries of politics, and to create a common heritage for all of humanity. The legacy of the Persian influence on the Abbasid court is one of the most enduring and most important aspects of the history of the Islamic world, for the institutions, the ideas, and the cultural forms that were created during the Abbasid period continued to shape the development of the Middle East and beyond for centuries, and their influence can be traced in the political systems, the literary traditions, and the artistic achievements of the many successor states that emerged from the Abbasid Empire, and in the broader civilization of Islam, which became a truly cosmopolitan and universal culture, in large part because of the contributions of the Persians and of the other non-Arab peoples who were brought into the fold of the Islamic community. The professionalization of the administration, the consolidation of the vizierate, the transformation of the court into an imperial center, the preservation and the translation of the ancient knowledge, the development of the political literature, the strengthening of the urban culture, and the spread of the Persian language across Asia. All of these achievements were the products of the cultural synthesis that took place in the Abbasid period, and they were made possible by the collaboration of the Arab and the Persian elites, who worked together to build a civilization that was greater than either of their individual traditions. And this collaboration was not always easy, for there were tensions and conflicts between the two groups, but the overall result was a remarkable success, a golden age of Islamic civilization that produced some of the greatest works of art, literature, and science in human history, and that left a legacy that continues to enrich the world today. And this legacy is a testament to the power of cultural exchange and to the importance of openness and tolerance in the life of a society. And it is a reminder that the greatest achievements of civilization are often the product of diversity and inclusion, and that the attempt to impose a single cultural model on a diverse society is likely to fail. While the willingness to embrace diversity and to learn from different traditions is the key to success, and this is a lesson that is as relevant in the 21st century as it was in the 8th, and it is a lesson that the story of the Persian conquest of the conquerors teaches with great clarity and force, and it is a lesson that we would do well to heed, as we navigate the challenges of a globalized world in which the encounter between different cultures is an everyday reality, and in which the choice between building walls and building bridges will determine the future of our species. And the example of the Abbasid Golden Age, with its remarkable fusion of the Arab and the Persian traditions, shows us that the building of bridges is not only possible but essential, and that the rewards of such bridge building are immense, for it is through the exchange of ideas and the collaboration of different peoples that the greatest achievements of human civilization are born, and the Persian conquest of the conquerors is a shining example of this truth. An example that continues to inspire and to guide us, and that reminds us of the power of culture to overcome the divisions of politics and to create a shared heritage that belongs to all of humanity. And this shared heritage is the true legacy of the Abbasid age, a legacy that we are all the inheritors of, and that we have a responsibility to preserve and to pass on to future generations, so that they too may learn from the wisdom of the past and may build a future that is worthy of the great civilizations that came before them. The cultural legacy of the Persian influence on the Abbasid court was particularly evident in the field of literature, where the Persian language and the Persian literary tradition, which had been preserved through the centuries of Arab rule, experienced a remarkable revival, and this revival produced a body of work that is among the finest in the history of world literature, including the epic poetry of Ferdowsi, the mystical verses of Rumi, and the lyrical poems of Hafez. And these works, which were written in the new Persian language, drew on the rich heritage of the ancient Persian tradition while also reflecting the influence of the Islamic faith and the Arabic literary tradition, and this synthesis of influences produced a literature that is both deeply rooted in the Persian past and profoundly engaged with the universal concerns of the human spirit. And this literature has had a profound influence on the cultures of the Middle East, Central Asia, and South Asia, and it continues to be read and admired by people around the world, and it is a testament to the power of the Persian cultural tradition, a tradition that was able to survive the Arab conquest and to flourish in the new Islamic environment, and this survival and this flourishing are among the greatest achievements of the Persian people, and they are a direct result of the cultural synthesis that took place in the Abbasid period, when the Persian language and the Persian culture found a new home within the framework of the Islamic civilization. And this synthesis was made possible by the contributions of the Persian administrators and scholars who served the Abbasid caliphs, and who used their positions to promote the Persian language and to preserve the Persian heritage, and this promotion and this preservation were essential to the survival of the Persian tradition. And they ensured that the Persian language would become one of the great languages of the Islamic world, a language of poetry, philosophy, and science. And this achievement is one of the most important legacies of the Abbasid age, a legacy that continues to shape the cultural landscape of the Middle East and beyond, and that stands as a reminder of the power of culture to transcend the boundaries of politics and to create a lasting heritage for future generations. And the story of the Persian conquest of the conquerors is, at its heart, a story of cultural survival and cultural achievement, a story that deserves to be told and remembered. And it is a story that we are honored to share with you today, and we hope that you will continue to explore the rich and fascinating history of the Islamic world, and to discover for yourself the many treasures that it has to offer. And we invite you to join us in our ongoing journey through the stories of our history, for there is so much more to learn, and so much more to celebrate. And we are grateful for your company on this journey, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next video. The victory of memory over political power is one of the most profound themes of the story of the Persian influence on the Abbasid court, for the Persians, having lost their empire and their political independence, nevertheless succeeded in preserving the memory of their past, and this memory, transmitted through the oral tradition, the written records, and the institutions of the new Islamic state, became a powerful force that shaped the culture and the identity of the Islamic world, and that ensured the survival of the Persian tradition long after the political power of the Caliphate had declined. And this victory of memory is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and to the power of culture to endure in the face of adversity. And it is a reminder that the true measure of a civilization is not its military power or its political dominance, but its ability to create and to preserve the things of the spirit, the ideas, the values, and the works of art that give meaning to human life. And the Persians, in this sense, were among the greatest of all civilizations, for they created a culture that was so rich and so enduring that it was able to survive the loss of political power and to continue to flourish in new and unexpected ways. And this achievement is one of the great stories of human history, a story of loss and renewal, of defeat and victory. And it is a story that is still being written today, for the Persian culture, now expressed primarily through the language and the literature of Iran, continues to evolve and to adapt, and it continues to produce works of art and literature that are admired around the world, and this continued vitality is a direct result of the cultural synthesis that took place in the Abbasid period, when the Persian tradition was able to find a new home within the Islamic civilization. And this synthesis was the work of the many Persian administrators, scholars, and artists who served the Abbasid caliphs, and who used their talents and their knowledge to ensure that the memory of their ancestors would not be forgotten, and that the Persian language and the Persian culture would continue to live. And this work of preservation and transmission was a form of conquest, a conquest of the mind and the spirit, and it was a conquest that proved to be far more enduring than any military victory, for the Persians, through the power of their memory, were able to shape the very identity of the Islamic world, and to leave a legacy that continues to influence the lives of hundreds of millions of people. And this legacy is the true victory of the Persians, a victory that was achieved not on the battlefield but in the quieter, more patient realm of culture and ideas. And it is a victory that deserves to be celebrated and remembered, and it is a victory that we are honored to bring to your attention in this video. And we hope that you will be inspired by the story of the Persian conquest of the conquerors, and that you will join us in our ongoing exploration of the many stories of our history, and that you will share this story with your friends and your family, and that you will help us to preserve the memory of the great civilizations of the past, so that they may continue to inspire and to guide us in the present and in the future. And we thank you for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next video, where we will continue our journey through the fascinating history of the Islamic world, and where we will explore the many other stories that have shaped the course of human civilization. And we hope that you will join us, and that you will continue to learn and to grow with us, and that together, we will build a community of learners who are dedicated to the preservation and the celebration of the great achievements of human history. And we are grateful for your support, and we wish you all the best. And we will see you in the next video. The story of the Persian conquest of the conquerors is a reminder that the relationship between conquerors and conquered is never a one-way street, for the encounter between different cultures always involves a process of mutual influence and transformation. And the civilization that emerges from such an encounter is often something new and unexpected, a hybrid that combines the best of both worlds. And this was certainly the case with the Abbasid Caliphate, which was neither purely Arab nor purely Persian but a unique synthesis of the two, and this synthesis was the foundation of the great achievements of the Islamic Golden Age, and it is a model of cultural exchange that remains relevant in our own time, when the world is becoming increasingly interconnected, and when the need for understanding and cooperation between different cultures has never been greater. And the example of the Abbasid age shows us that it is possible to build a society that is both diverse and unified, and that the encounter between different cultures can be a source of strength and creativity, rather than a source of conflict and division. And this is a lesson that we would do well to learn, as we face the challenges of the 21st century, and as we strive to build a world that is more just, more peaceful, and more prosperous for all of humanity. And the Persian administrators and scholars who served the Abbasid caliphs, and who helped to create the magnificent civilization of the Golden Age, are our guides in this endeavor, for they showed us that it is possible to be proud of one's own heritage while also embracing the contributions of others, and that the greatest achievements of civilization are often the product of collaboration and exchange. And this is the lesson that we take from the story of the Persian conquest of the conquerors. And it is a lesson that we will carry with us as we continue our journey through the stories of our history. And we invite you to join us on this journey, and to share your own thoughts and insights with us, and to help us to build a community of learners who are dedicated to the preservation and the celebration of the great achievements of human civilization. And we thank you for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next video, where we will continue to explore the rich and fascinating history of the Islamic world, and where we will discover new stories that will inspire and enlighten us. And we hope that you will be there with us, and that together, we will continue to learn and to grow, and to build a future that is worthy of the great civilizations of the past. And we will see you in the next video. And until then, we wish you all the best, and we thank you for your support, and we hope that you enjoyed this content, and we will see you in the next video. The role of the Persian secretaries, the Kutab, in the administration of the Abbasid Caliphate was so central that it is impossible to imagine the functioning of the state without them, for these men, who were the heirs of a centuries-old tradition of bureaucratic expertise, were responsible for the day-to-day management of the empire, and their skills in the arts of writing, accounting, and organization were essential to the collection of taxes, the maintenance of the army, and the administration of justice, and their influence extended far beyond the offices of the Diwan, for they were also the advisors to the Caliph, the educators of the young princes, and the guardians of the cultural memory of the state, and their collective contribution to the success of the Abbasid Caliphate was immense, and it is a contribution that has often been overlooked in the popular accounts of Islamic history, which tend to focus on the exploits of the soldiers and the caliphs, but without the quiet work of the secretaries, the empire could not have functioned, and the golden age of Islamic civilization would not have been possible. And this is why the story of the Persian Kuttab is so important, for it is a story of the unsung heroes of history, the men who worked behind the scenes to build and to maintain one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever seen, and their story deserves to be told. And we are honored to tell it, and we hope that it will inspire a new appreciation for the importance of the administrative arts, and for the men and women who practice them, and who, in our own time, continue to play a vital role in the functioning of our societies, even if their contributions are often taken for granted. And we hope that this story will encourage you to think about the many people who work behind the scenes in our own world, and to appreciate the importance of their work, and to recognize that the smooth functioning of any complex society depends on the skills and the dedication of its administrators, and that these administrators deserve our respect and our gratitude. And we hope that you will join us in celebrating the legacy of the Persian Kuttab, and in recognizing the importance of the administrative arts in the history of civilization. And we thank you for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video, where we will continue to explore the fascinating stories of our history, and where we will discover new insights into the workings of the great civilizations of the past. And we hope that you will join us, and that you will continue to learn and to grow with us, and that together, we will build a community of learners who are dedicated to the preservation and the celebration of the great achievements of human history. And we are grateful for your support, and we will see you in the next video. The education and the training of the Persian secretaries was a long and rigorous process, for the young man who aspired to a career in the administration had to master a wide range of subjects, including the Arabic language, which was the language of government, the principles of Islamic law, which governed the conduct of the state, and the traditions of Persian statecraft, which provided the practical wisdom that was essential for the management of the empire. And this education was often conducted within the family, for the knowledge of the administrative arts was passed down from father to son, and the families of the Kuttab formed a kind of hereditary caste, a class of professional administrators who were bound together by ties of kinship and by a shared sense of their own importance and their own dignity. And this hereditary nature of the bureaucracy was a source of strength, for it ensured the continuity of the administrative tradition, and it was also a source of tension, for it created a closed elite that was sometimes resented by those who were excluded from its ranks, and this tension was a feature of the Abbasid period, and it is a tension that is familiar in many societies, where the existence of a privileged bureaucratic class can be a source of both stability and resentment. And the Abbasid experience offers a rich case study in the dynamics of bureaucratic power. And it is a case study that is still relevant today, in a world where the power of the administrative state is a subject of constant debate, and where the relationship between the bureaucracy and the public is a matter of great concern. And the story of the Persian Kuttab is a story that can teach us much about the nature of bureaucratic power, and about the responsibilities that come with it, and about the importance of maintaining the integrity and the competence of the administrative class, and about the dangers of allowing that class to become a closed and self-serving elite. And these are lessons that we would do well to learn, for the health of any society depends on the quality of its administration, and on the willingness of its administrators to serve the public good with honesty and dedication. And the Persian Kuttab, at their best, were models of such service, and their example is one that we should strive to emulate, and their story is one that we should remember. And we are grateful for the opportunity to share it with you, and we hope that you will find it as inspiring as we do, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video, where we will continue to explore the rich and fascinating history of the Islamic world, and where we will discover new stories that will enlighten and inspire us. And we thank you for your attention, and we will see you in the next video. The transformation of the Abbasid court into a center of Persian culture was not limited to the realm of politics and administration, for the influence of the Persian tradition was also felt in the arts, in the architecture, in the music, and in the manners of the court, and this cultural transformation was a crucial factor in the creation of the distinctive civilization of the Abbasid Golden Age. A civilization that was characterized by its elegance, its sophistication, and its cosmopolitanism. And that set the standard for the rest of the Islamic world for centuries to come. The Persian influence on the architecture of the Abbasid period was particularly evident in the design of the great palaces and mosques, which combined the structural forms of the Arab tradition with the decorative motifs and the spatial concepts of the Persian tradition, and the result was a style of architecture that was both monumental and graceful. And that reflected the power and the sophistication of the Abbasid state, and the most famous example of this style is the city of Baghdad itself, with its circular plan, its imposing walls, and its central palace, which was a deliberate imitation of the great cities of the ancient Persian Empire, and which was designed to project an image of imperial power and divine authority. And this image was reinforced by the elaborate ceremonies and the rich furnishings of the court, which were also drawn from the Persian tradition, and which created an atmosphere of luxury and refinement that was unmatched in the medieval world. And this atmosphere was the backdrop for the great cultural achievements of the age, for it was in this environment of beauty and sophistication that the poets, the scholars, and the artists of the Abbasid period produced their greatest works, and the Persian influence on the arts of the Abbasid period was so profound that it is often difficult to distinguish between what was originally Arab and what was originally Persian. And this blending of traditions was itself a creative act, and it produced a culture that was uniquely Islamic, and that was capable of absorbing and transforming the influences of the many peoples who came under its sway, and this capacity for absorption and transformation was the hallmark of the Abbasid civilization, and it is the key to understanding its greatness, and it is a capacity that we would do well to cultivate in our own time, as we confront the challenges of a globalized world, and as we seek to build a society that is open to the influences of other cultures while remaining true to our own values. And the example of the Abbasid age shows us that this is possible, and that the result can be a civilization of extraordinary richness and vitality. And this is the lesson that we take from the story of the Persian conquest of the conquerors, and we hope that it will inspire you to learn more about the history of the Islamic world, and to appreciate the many contributions that it has made to the common heritage of humanity. And we thank you for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video. The cultural transformation of the Abbasid court was also reflected in the development of a new style of Arabic literature, a style that was heavily influenced by the Persian tradition, and that was characterized by its elegance, its wit, and its sophistication. And this new style, which came to be known as the New Style, or the Modern Style, was a departure from the earlier, more austere poetry of the Arab tradition, and it was marked by the use of elaborate metaphors, the cultivation of verbal ornament, and the celebration of the pleasures of life. And this new style was the product of the cultural environment of the Abbasid court, where the Persian influence had created a taste for refinement and luxury, and where the poets competed with one another in the composition of verses that displayed their skill and their erudition. And this competition produced some of the greatest poetry in the Arabic language, including the works of Abu Nuwas, Abu Tamim, and al-Mutanabi, who are considered among the finest poets in the history of Arabic literature, and whose verses are still read and admired today. And the influence of the Persian tradition on these poets was profound, for they drew on the themes and the imagery of the Persian poetic tradition, including the celebration of wine, the love of nature, and the meditation on the transience of life. And they combined these themes with the Islamic faith and the Arabic language to create a poetry that was both universal and distinctively Islamic. And this poetry was a crucial part of the cultural life of the Abbasid court, and it helped to define the aesthetic standards of the age, and it was a source of pride for the entire Islamic community, and it continues to be a source of inspiration for poets and readers around the world, and this literary achievement is one of the great legacies of the Abbasid age. And it is a legacy that was made possible by the cultural synthesis of the Arab and the Persian traditions, a synthesis that is the subject of our story, and that we are honored to share with you, and we hope that you will be inspired to explore the rich and fascinating history of the Islamic world, and to discover for yourself the many treasures that it has to offer. And we thank you for your attention. And we look forward to seeing you in our next video, where we will continue to explore the stories of our history, and where we will discover new insights into the workings of the great civilizations of the past. And we hope that you will join us, and that you will continue to learn and to grow with us, and that together, we will build a community of learners who are dedicated to the preservation and the celebration of the great achievements of human history. And we are grateful for your support, and we will see you in the next video. The long-term consequences of the Persian influence on the Abbasid court were profound and far-reaching, for the institutions and the ideas that were developed during the Abbasid period continued to shape the political and cultural life of the Islamic world for centuries, and their influence can be traced in the many successor states that emerged from the fragmentation of the Abbasid Empire, including the Samanids, the Umayyads, the Ghaznavids, and the Seljuks, all of whom drew on the administrative and cultural traditions that had been established in Baghdad, and who continued to employ Persian administrators and to patronize Persian poets and scholars. And this continuity ensured the survival and the spread of the Persian cultural tradition, and it contributed to the emergence of a Persianate world, a vast cultural region that stretched from Anatolia to Bengal. And that was united by the shared use of the Persian language, the shared appreciation of the Persian literary tradition, and the shared adoption of the Persian model of government. And this Persianate world was one of the most important cultural formations of the medieval period, and it was a direct product of the Persian influence on the Abbasid court, and it is a legacy that is still visible today, in the literature, the art, and the architecture of the many countries that were part of this world, and in the continued use of the Persian language as a language of culture and learning in a region that extends from Iran to India. And this legacy is a testament to the power of the Persian cultural tradition, and to the success of the Persian conquest of the conquerors. And it is a legacy that we are proud to celebrate, and that we hope to share with you. And we invite you to learn more about the Persianate world, and to discover the many treasures that it has to offer. And we thank you for your attention. And we look forward to seeing you in our next video, where we will continue to explore the fascinating history of the Islamic world, and where we will discover new stories that will inspire and enlighten us. And we hope that you will join us, and that you will continue to learn and to grow with us, and that together, we will build a community of learners who are dedicated to the preservation and the celebration of the great achievements of human history. And we are grateful for your support. And we will see you in the next video. The influence of the Persian model of government was not limited to the Islamic world, for the ideas and the institutions that were developed in the Abbasid court, including the office of the vizier, the system of the diwan, and the concept of the just ruler, were transmitted to Europe through the various channels of cultural exchange, including the Crusades, the trade routes, and the translations of Arabic works into Latin. And these ideas and institutions had a profound influence on the development of the European states, particularly in the areas of administration, law, and political theory. And this influence is a reminder of the interconnectedness of the medieval world, and of the important role that the Islamic civilization played in the transmission of knowledge and ideas to Europe. And it is a role that has often been overlooked in the traditional accounts of European history, which tend to focus on the achievements of the Greeks and the Romans and to neglect the contributions of the Islamic world. But the work of modern scholars has begun to correct this imbalance, and it is now widely recognized that the Islamic civilization was a crucial intermediary in the transmission of the classical heritage to Europe, and that it also made its own original contributions to the development of science, philosophy, and political theory. Contributions that were essential to the intellectual foundations of the modern world, and this recognition is a testament to the importance of the story that we are telling today, the story of the Persian conquest of the conquerors, and of the cultural synthesis that took place in the Abbasid court. And this story is not just a story of the past but a story that is still relevant to our present, for it reminds us of the importance of cultural exchange and of the contributions of different civilizations to the common heritage of humanity. And it is a story that should be known and celebrated by people of all backgrounds. And we are honored to bring it to you, and we hope that it will inspire you to learn more about the history of the Islamic world and about the many contributions that it has made to the world in which we live. And we thank you for your attention. And we look forward to seeing you in our next video, where we will continue to explore the stories of our history, and where we will discover new insights into the workings of the great civilizations of the past. And we hope that you will join us, and that you will continue to learn and to grow with us, and that together, we will build a community of learners who are dedicated to the preservation and the celebration of the great achievements of human history. And we are grateful for your support, and we will see you in the next video. The story of the Persian conquest of the Conquerors is a story of transformation, of the meeting of two great civilizations and the creation of something new and enduring. And it is a story that has profound lessons for our own time, for it shows us that the encounter between different cultures can be a source of strength and creativity, rather than a source of conflict and division. And that the greatest achievements of civilization are often the product of collaboration and exchange, and that the barriers that we erect between ourselves are often the greatest obstacles to our own progress, and that the bridges that we build between cultures are the pathways to a better future. And these lessons are as relevant today as they were in the 8th century, and they are lessons that we would do well to heed, as we navigate the challenges of a globalized world, and as we strive to build a society that is open and inclusive, and that draws on the best of all cultures, and the example of the Abbasid Golden Age, with its remarkable fusion of the Arab and the Persian traditions, is a beacon of hope, a reminder that it is possible to build a civilization that is both diverse and unified, and that the encounter between different cultures can be a source of beauty and wisdom. And this example is one that we should celebrate and emulate, and it is one that we are proud to share with you. And we hope that it will inspire you to learn more about the history of the Islamic world, and to appreciate the many contributions that it has made to the common heritage of humanity. And we hope that you will join us in our ongoing journey through the stories of our history, and that you will share this story with your friends and your family, and that you will help us to preserve the memory of the great civilizations of the past, so that they may continue to inspire and to guide us in the present and in the future. And we thank you for your attention and for your support, and we invite you to activate the bell and to follow us on social media for more stories of our history. And if you like this video, please leave your like, comment, and share, and let's get to 1,000 likes, and together, we will build a community of learners who are dedicated to the preservation and the celebration of the great achievements of human history, and we are grateful for your support. And we look forward to seeing you in our next video, where we will continue to explore the fascinating history of the Islamic world, and where we will discover new stories that will inspire and enlighten us, and we hope that you will be there with us, and that together, we will continue to learn and to grow, and to build a future that is worthy of the great civilizations of the past. And we thank you once again, and I hope you enjoyed this content, and I'll see you in the next video.